Jaden Ivey took to an unfiltered live broadcast, publicly confronting basketball icons like Stephen Curry and LeBron James. Just hours later, his team released him. Today, unverified, explosive recordings featuring league athletes are sweeping across the internet, igniting rampant speculation regarding illicit acts and impending formal inquiries. We are stepping back to examine this complex unraveling. We will analyze the spoken words, the heavy accusations, and the deep unrest currently gripping professional basketball. This is a story of profound human struggle. Entering the world on February 13, 2002, Jaden Edward Ivey Ivey inherited a profound athletic lineage. The hardwood was simply part of his DNA. His mother, Niela Ivey, currently commands the Notre Dame women's squad. Before coaching, she forged her own formidable legacy there as a collegiate standout, eventually dedicating 5 grueling years to the Professional Women's League. Meanwhile, his father, Jaden Hunter, carved out a brutal, physical career on the gridiron, competing for both the Baltimore Ravens and the San Francisco 49ers. That relentless athletic drive traces back to his grandfather, James Hunter, who previously battled in the trenches for the Detroit Lions. The genetic foundation was undeniable. The crushing weight of immense expectations loomed large, perfectly matched by his raw, natural abilities. Committing his focus entirely to the court during his 9th grade campaign, he spent 3 formative developmental years battling for Marion High School across the courts of Mishawaka, Indiana. Seeking a sharper crucible for his final year, he transitioned to La Lumiere in LaPorte, integrating himself into a nationally revered powerhouse designed to forge future champions. Widely regarded as an elite 4-star prospect, he chose the Purdue Boilermakers, bypassing heavy interest from Butler and his mother's alma mater. Upon arrival, his impact was immediate and undeniable. During his inaugural collegiate run, he secured 11.1 points alongside 3.3 boards nightly, claiming early conference accolades. Yet, his second chapter truly elevated his status into national consciousness. That pivotal sophomore campaign yielded 17.3 points, 4.9 rebounds, and 3.1 dimes each outing. Those undeniable metrics earned him prestigious conference honors and secured a highly coveted All-American nod. By March 31, 2022, the young guard made the definitive choice to leave amateur athletics behind, officially entering his name into the 2022 professional selection process. The Detroit Pistons eagerly claimed him using their 5th overall selection that summer. In the eyes of a starving franchise, he represented the ultimate cornerstone of tomorrow. The grand vision paired him with Cade Cunningham, forming a dynamic backcourt destined to drag a struggling organization out from a dark, extended era of losing. Stepping onto the professional hardwood on October 19th, he delivered an electrifying 19 points, 3 boards, and 4 dimes to secure a 113-109 victory against Orlando. The sheer star power was instantly visible. Securing a spot among the 2022-23 elite rookie class, he generated 16.3 points, 3.9 rebounds, and 5.2 assists, nightly operating at a solid 41.6% efficiency. Navigating the grind of his sophomore professional year, he took the floor 77 times, logging 15.4 points, 3.4 boards, 3.8 dimes, alongside 0.7 steals and 0.5 deflections. A profound offensive explosion occurred on February 7, 2024, where he dropped 37 points, grabbed 6 boards, and distributed 7 passes to dismantle Sacramento, 133-120. Those brief moments of sheer dominance were undeniable, suggesting a trajectory without bounds. However, the dawn of the 2024-25 schedule changed everything. Establishing a formidable rhythm, the former Boilermaker was producing a commanding 17.6 points each evening, demonstrating a matured, surgical approach to the game. Tragically, fate intervened on the very first day of 2025. While constructing a masterpiece of a season, a devastating left fibula fracture during that fateful January clash against Orlando brought his momentum to a violent halt. Medical professionals promptly performed a season-terminating procedure to surgically reconstruct the shattered bone. This physical trauma served as a profound catalyst for transformation, shattering not merely his physical form, but totally reconstructing his psychological framework and spiritual foundation. It fundamentally altered his destiny's course. That fractured leg stole a monumental chapter, erasing what was undeniably destined to be his ultimate professional breakthrough. Having avoided major ailments throughout his initial 2 campaigns, his critical third chapter was suddenly derailed by that catastrophic lower body trauma sustained at the dawn of 2025. The damage abruptly paused a truly masterful performance, eclipsing everything he had accomplished up until that moment in his career, forcing him into extended exile away from the hardwood. Yet, navigating the agonizing isolation of physical rehabilitation, an internal earthquake occurred, a profound, permanent evolution of his inner self. Healing demanded far more than mending muscle and bone. It required surviving an immense, suffocating mental battle in the quiet hours. Confronting significant trauma for the very first time, the isolated athlete later revealed that profound darkness and ideations of ending his own life consumed him during the post-operative stillness. A mere 24 hours after the organization terminated his contract, he sat down before the microphones of the Pinpoint broadcast to bare his soul. He articulated a profound dependency on his newfound spiritual conviction, crediting a higher power with anchoring him when the suffocating urge to surrender his life felt entirely overwhelming. The specifics offered a chilling glimpse into despair. Speaking with absolute vulnerability, he described gripping potent narcotics, trembling at the precipice of absolute destruction, ready to fade away completely. He recalled his desperate wife frantically begging him to stay. Alongside this agonizing confession, separate footage emerged, detailing a deeply buried trauma, exposing the devastating reality of his childhood exploitation. Reflecting on those fractured early years, he confessed to existing entirely devoid of genuine affection, harboring unspeakable, guarded pain anchored in the violation he endured long before he found basketball. Such raw confessions introduced a staggering burden of humanity into an ongoing controversy that the digital world was carelessly consuming for cheap entertainment and fleeting outrage. In absolute terms, the guard attributes his physical survival to a radical embrace of the Christian faith. He maintains that his spiritual awakening provided the necessary armor to conquer severe battles with physical compulsions, ultimately pulling him from the wreckage of incredibly destructive lifestyle patterns. Looking backward, he admits the professional league once served as his absolute idol. Entering the highest level of competition, he possessed zero spiritual foundation, entirely disconnected from any divine anchor. He openly characterized his former self as a man lost to deep intoxication, entirely consumed by lustful dependencies and hollow physical pursuits. The euphoria of buzzer beaters and monstrous box scores merely provided an artificial high, a fragile momentary thrill that completely dissolved the second the stadium went dark. Only after his foundation shattered, while drowning in the absolute bleakness of rehabilitation, did a profoundly intimate spiritual clarity finally break through the darkness. He eventually framed this pivotal transition as a total resurrection, the definitive execution of his former identity, burying the youthful, reckless version of the man people once cheered for. The gravity-defying athlete whose pulse was entirely dictated by fan applause ceased to exist. Through his own lens, that hollow shell was eradicated, leaving behind an individual fiercely convinced his ultimate purpose far transcended a simple game. Yet, this profound metamorphosis was anything but silent, and the professional basketball landscape was destined to absorb its absolute shockwave. During the 2025 exhibition slate, tragedy struck against Memphis when a devastating knee injury shelved him entirely. To alleviate the persistent joint agony, he submitted to an arthroscopic procedure, a massive setback costing him 4 brutal weeks. Although he battled back the following exhibition circuit, fate delivered another devastating blow. He ground out just 33 appearances, starting merely twice during the 2025-26 campaign in Detroit, mustering a modest 8.2 points, 2.2 boards, and 1.6 dimes, a heartbreaking freefall from his previous 17.6. That breathtaking dynamo who previously scorched Sacramento for 37 points had become a ghost, chained to a reserve role for an organization ruthlessly charting a new course. Eventually, management made the final cut. On February 3, 2026, the front office shipped him to Chicago in a complex, 3-way transaction involving Minnesota. As a critical piece of that sweeping transaction, sharpshooter Kevin Huerter headed straight for Detroit. Leadership in the Windy City desperately envisioned reviving the 24-year-old's fading legacy following his grueling trials. For one fleeting instant, salvation appeared within reach. He took the floor 4 times wearing red, contributing 11.5 points, 4.8 boards, and 4.0 assists. Quiet whispers suggesting his raw brilliance remained buried, begging for a spark. Yet almost instantly, the cultural climate surrounding him began to fracture and twist, morphing into something completely divorced from basketball. While he never hid his spiritual convictions in Michigan, that fundamental fervor escalated dramatically upon arriving, ultimately alienating front office personnel who characterized his locker room presence as overwhelmingly dogmatic. Insiders revealed to the National Sports Network that this was a far cry from customary spiritual displays, those quiet chapel moments or standard words of gratitude. What was unfolding behind closed doors was infinitely more combative, completely unyielding, and profoundly destabilizing to the collective peace. A veteran beat writer for the local daily publication noted that, beyond crossing boundaries by interrogating media personnel about intimate bedroom activities, he generated deeply suffocating unease, actively assigning moral grades to his peers and dividing their private sanctuary into the saved and damned. The journalist detailed how those routine press scrums ceased entirely to function as a platform for discussing on-court strategy. Instead, these gatherings morphed into aggressive pulpit sessions, interrogating journalists regarding their moral compass, casting a massive shadow over his professional longevity. He has subsequently maintained a firm narrative that rival franchises refuse to offer contracts simply because they harbor deep prejudices against his devotion. Long before his bags were packed for the trade, quiet whispers suggested he had already embraced this forceful pastoral persona in Detroit, with traditional interviews devolving into heavy-handed theological lectures, pressing the press on their eternal salvation and probing about intimacy outside of wedlock. The bubbling tension finally hardened into public reality under the harsh glare of studio lights on the 19th of February. During a pivotal clash with Toronto, the coaching staff anchored him to the bench, marking the very first occasion his absence was strictly managerial. Addressing the media following that defining evening, he openly acknowledged a profound internal shift, conceding the former athlete was gone, leaning heavily into his theological awakening during that post-game huddle. He dropped a heavy sentiment that served as the ultimate catalyst for the collapse. He boldly proclaimed that his former self was entirely dead, completely awakened by divine purpose, effectively superseding any athletic obligations or professional expectations. That crossroads struck fear into executives, sparking the realization that no strategic adjustment could salvage the fracture. Based on insights from that seasoned local columnist, this relentless drive to convert his peers ultimately forced the franchise to evaluate his capacity for standard brotherhood. The reporter speculated the ultimate release stemmed not solely from exclusionary rhetoric, but from a toxic behavioral loop fundamentally shattering the sacred trust required within a professional athletic sanctuary. The final curtain on his athletic contributions in Chicago officially crashed down on March 26th. Medical personnel permanently shut down his campaign due to a devastating left knee complication. His hardwood journey halted, while sending sheer panic rippling through the professional sports community. Then, on March 30th, he uploaded the ultimate destructive spark. Windy City management ultimately severed ties with the embattled guard that Monday, citing deeply destructive organizational behavior, a severe consequence dealt mere hours following a combative digital broadcast, where his spiritual crusading crossed into aggressive cultural prejudices. During that fateful recording, he aimed directly at the league's inclusivity initiatives, forcefully condemning the entire movement as moral decay. The crusade pushed further. He recklessly launched unprovoked attacks against immortal titans Stephen Curry, LeBron James, and Michael Jordan, challenging their spiritual authenticity. Weaponizing his platform, he publicly audited the personal devotion of those legendary figures, essentially branding their faith as fundamentally hollow. He fervently argued that chasing golden hardware while ignoring divine mandate was an entirely empty pursuit, insisting these celebrated heroes were completely lost, ultimately focusing squarely on Steph Curry, boldly proclaiming the legendary shooter remained entirely unyielded spiritually, and that society just accepts his wholesome Christian image simply due to a Philippians chapter 4 verse 13 reference. When that video finally dropped, the impact was absolutely deafening. You are looking at a 24-year-old kid, a guy drafted 5th overall, an athlete who quite literally laced up his sneakers in the exact same locker rooms as the peers of these modern basketball icons, publicly broadcasting to the world that the most legendary figures to ever touch a basketball were wandering blindly without a spiritual compass, claiming that every single one of their hard-earned rings, most valuable player trophies, and Hall of Fame jackets amounted to absolutely zero value before the creator. He went on to specifically target the legacy-defining titles captured by Steph Curry, LeBron James, and Michael Jordan, dismissing them as completely irrelevant when the final judgment arrives. It took merely minutes for that footage to sweep across the internet. The public fallout was incredibly swift, violently scattering across every imaginable corner of the cultural landscape. Digital platforms practically burned down with heated arguments, viral jokes, fierce defenders, heavy criticism, and absolute chaos. The Chicago front office, however, refused to sit back and watch the storm gather. On Monday, the Chicago Bulls officially cut ties with guard Jaden Ivey, citing erratic behavior that actively damaged the organization's foundational culture. In a matter of hours, a prospect once universally celebrated as a top 5 talent found himself entirely exiled, stripped of his jersey and his coveted place in the league, thrust directly into the blazing inferno of the most explosive controversy the association had weathered in over a decade. Yet, instead of stepping back into the shadows, Ivey leaned heavily into the fire. He forcefully rejected the notion that his actions harmed the locker room dynamics, standing firm on his claim that his only offense was spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ. Then came the piercing inquiry that echoed deeply across both his loyal followers and his fiercest detractors, questioning why the league freely champions Pride Month while allegedly silencing his personal religious convictions. Television personality Stephen A. Smith entered the arena on his broadcast, noting that a single 42-minute social media rant had essentially placed a highly promising athletic career on permanent life support. Josh Giddey, who shared the hardwood with Ivey in Chicago, described the unfolding tragedy as deeply regrettable, earnestly wishing the young guard finds the right support system. Meanwhile, Chicago assistant J.B. Bickerstaff, who previously mentored him in Detroit, offered a more grounded perspective, emphasizing that the brutal psychological toll of professional sports cannot be ignored when analyzing a person's highly erratic life choices. Down in Dallas, big man Daniel Gafford faced reporters wearing a bold statement reading, "Faith is not for the fragile," though he quickly clarified it had absolutely zero connection to the ongoing drama in Chicago, explaining he had not even processed the garment's message until media members pointed it out. Still, a quiet chorus of athletes voiced their solidarity with the broader sentiment, most notably New England Patriots running back Travion Henderson. The cultural battle lines were firmly established as the public discourse grew increasingly intense. Simultaneously, the exiled guard became the focal point of a massive digital whisper campaign suggesting a sudden pact with the Los Angeles Lakers. Even though these rumblings lacked any factual foundation, the internet absolutely flooded with incredibly convincing, yet entirely fabricated, breaking news graphics announcing a fresh one-year contract in Southern California. The reality was completely non-existent. Yet, the counterfeit narrative consumed the timeline with terrifying speed, perfectly illustrating the sheer gravity and massive scale of this young man's unraveling public life. Then emerged the absolute most haunting visual of this entire chaotic saga. The 24-year-old athlete, a man who mere days ago suited up for one of basketball's most iconic and historic franchises, was unexpectedly filmed, swapping his professional-grade sneakers for a blaring loudspeaker on a random patch of public municipal sidewalk. In footage that violently tore through digital feeds, he stood at the famous Toomer's Corner in Auburn, Alabama, aggressively preaching his truth to anyone within earshot. That specific clip, heavily circulated on TikTok during the opening weekend of April 2026, captured the former pro emphatically reciting biblical passages to a modest, deeply bewildered audience standing nearby, while an associate hovered in the background, clutching a massive placard. The recording specifically highlights him projecting the words of Matthew chapter 5, verse 8, declaring that the pure of heart will inherit the divine vision, directly channeling the legendary Sermon on the Mount. Less than a week after living out the ultimate athletic dream, the former superstar was firmly planted on municipal concrete, desperately attempting to save the souls of everyday pedestrians. Even with his professional basketball life effectively shattered, the polarizing guard shows absolutely zero signs of shrinking away from the blinding, unforgiving glare of public scrutiny. That highly publicized scene in Alabama, defined by his relentless biblical recitations to that tight-knit crowd, paints the picture of a man wholly consumed by his controversial new purpose. Unfortunately, the aggressive, deeply unorthodox manner in which he chose to broadcast that exact spiritual truth is the very thing that permanently severed his lucrative employment. By electing to completely sever ties, the Chicago organization made the 24-year-old only the 9th athlete in the modern era to be discarded while still protected by a foundational 4-year rookie-scale contract. It is the exact type of dark, highly unusual career milestone that silently haunts a professional athlete's legacy forever.
Be receiving his full $1 million salary this NBA season.
The financial security is undeniably locked in, but the lingering, incredibly heavy question remains, will this deeply troubled talent ever step onto a professional court again? Adding a profoundly tragic layer, the guard confessed on the Pinpoint podcast that his spouse and immediate relatives severed all communication during a frantic 48-hour window. The human toll here has been both agonizing and incredibly swift. A lucrative athletic journey suddenly vanished into thin air. His closest bloodlines and foundational marital bonds fractured almost beyond recognition. His mainstream cultural standing was utterly annihilated from dusk till dawn. Analysts on the Fumble broadcast peeled back the layers of his rhetoric, gently suggesting that the core issue might actually stem from a severe, entirely undiagnosed psychological crisis. One specific commentator observed that the young man's frantic energy mirrors acute mania, pointing out that these highly erratic behavioral shifts often serve as the terrifying precursors to prolonged cognitive breakdowns. Beyond the heartbreaking admission of a past suicide attempt, he has weaponized his digital platforms against his peers, actively alienated his inner circle, and completely torched his standing among professional front offices and former teammates, causing loud disturbances in shared civilian environments. Bizarrely shifting conversations toward random topics like apple pie during intensely serious moments. These fragmented actions simply do not align with a human being operating from a place of solid mental clarity. Instead, they vividly paint the classic, deeply tragic picture of an individual drowning in the depths of a profound psychiatric emergency. In one piece of footage captured aboard a commercial flight, the former lottery pick aggressively condemned Steph Curry over their vastly differing theological doctrines, projecting his divine revelations at maximum volume until cabin crew formally instructed him to engage his device's airplane mode. That singular incident, forcing a spiritual sermon upon captive passengers until being silenced by authority, masterfully captured the raw essence of a deeply tormented soul, navigating life entirely outside the safe, predictable borders of rational human behavior. We are left staring at a lingering question. Did this avalanche of leaked video, those raw social media broadcasts, the turbulent mid-flight tirades, alongside the sidewalk preaching and deeply personal audio interviews, genuinely dismantle the livelihoods of more than 50 professional basketball players, just like the headline claims? Taking his words at face value, Jaden Ivey directly challenged the moral compass of giants from Stephen Curry to LeBron James to Michael Jordan, questioning the spiritual integrity of every Springfield inductee, and made it unequivocally clear that every piece of championship hardware, every most valuable player award, and every historic milestone means absolutely nothing absent a devotion to Jesus Christ. That profound sentiment, immortalized on film and beamed across millions of glowing devices worldwide, attempted to rewrite the immortal legacies of countless basketball icons through a single, unyielding proclamation. Yet, did it actually shatter their professional standing? The diamond-encrusted jewelry still shines. Their statistical monuments remain unbroken. To the global community of die-hard supporters, seasoned pundits, and basketball scholars, those resumes haven't lost their luster. The professional trajectory that Ivey was most actively dismantling through this unfiltered documentary was never that of an all-time great like Curry, James, or Jordan. He was simply burning down his own. Today, his future within the association hangs by an incredibly fragile thread. The basketball universe is collectively holding its breath, waiting to see if a rival front office possesses the courage to gamble on the heavily scrutinized guard. Yet, looking at the man today, it appears Ivey cares far more deeply about fulfilling his higher calling than he does about securing another lucrative contract on the hardwood. Selected 5th overall on draft night, honored as a rookie standout, and boasting a stunning 37-point masterclass, along with a peak scoring average of 17.6 a night. Every ounce of that athletic brilliance is now eclipsed by viral recordings destined to haunt his footsteps indefinitely. In the end, the solitary basketball journey left lying in ashes is the exact one that once overflowed with terrifying potential. Forced off the floor by a nagging knee ailment, his brief chapter in Chicago evaporated in under 60 days, crumbling not from a lack of athletic execution beneath the stadium lights, but entirely due to his unapologetic convictions away from the arena. As he navigates free agency, the athletic community is forced to study the brutal impact of a singular human voice colliding with an immense corporate empire.